Okay, so this is the second PowerPoint for Tuesday, week 9. Again, we're just breaking these up. This one might be a little bit shorter than the first one. So we'll have two this week on Tuesday and two on Thursday. And we'll talk a little bit about the homework, and then I'll explain the homework a little bit better on the Thursday slides, but we'll talk a little bit about it today. So we're going to talk about where English is spoken today, why language changes, with an emphasis on syntax. That takes us to grammaticalization theory, and then we'll look at some syntactic changes that started in the 20th century and continues into the 21st century. So these are present day changes that you can see, you can hear, you can research, and get an understanding of who's making these changes. I'll talk about some paper ideas throughout the next few weeks. So some on this slide. We'll talk about the readings for Thursday, and then a little bit about what I want you to do for next Thursday by next Tuesday. So common homework. I'll introduce it today, and then you will have until a whole week to do it. So. All right, so this is a map of where English is spoken around the world today. We've become a global language with many different varieties. So not only do we have U.S. Dialects that are slightly different and throughout the country, throughout the United States, we can hear differences, we can see syntactic differences, pronunciation differences, lexical choice differences. But we also have a global English where English is being spoken all over the world, and that's changing it too. There are different forms of English depending on its speakers. So underlying the changes to syntax in particular is this notion of grammaticalization. And this is a change. This is where some syntactic form, morphological form, lexical form changes unidirectionally. So it goes one way, it doesn't change back. And it acquires a new status. It requires a new syntactic function. We've seen this over and over with functional shift or back formation. These are parts of grammaticalization where a word undergoes a change and becomes something new in the language. It could also refer to a piece of a word. It doesn't have to be a whole word. It can be part of the morphology changes and once meant one thing and now means something else. So we'll look at syntactic changes and morphological changes. Sometimes these changes take hundreds of years to accomplish, or sometimes they can be done in a much shorter period of time. I think now with the changes we see with technology, with the internet, you see these changes occurring a little bit faster. So here's just a kind of example of the way that grammaticalization happens. Notice in Old English we had a noun, heid. It meant state or quality as the noun, but by present day English it had changed from being a lexical item of a noun to just a derivational suffix, hood. So whenever we applied hood to something, neighborhood, then that affix originally came from a noun form. Similarly, in Old English, we had a noun like, so body. So you might find this word in old poems, meaning body, being used as a noun. And that word or that actual noun changed into the ly ending. And we know that we've seen this ly ending in a lot of adverbs, some adjectives like friendly, and in present day English that we no longer have that noun lic, but we do have the ly ending. This doesn't just happen in English. I've given you some examples from German. Also, you see the influence of Latin into Spanish. So these are all done through grammaticalization. At the bottom, I just give you the scroll just to remind you of the abbreviations. So Old English, Middle English, Present Day English, and then Standard English is the prescriptive form of English that we say follows all of our rules. So we'll talk a lot about present day syntactic changes. I give you some examples here just to think about, and as you listen to language changing around you, you'll be more aware of them. We talked about this notion of whom. Whom is the standard English pronoun for uh, the object, that you're in question, or when we're doing a relative clause and you want to refer to an object, we use whom instead of who. So with whom are you going to the dance? Notice how formal that sounds. But we do see in standard, in present day English, this whom is going away. It probably will go away by the time you have the next couple generations, because it's almost gone in spoken language. But it still exists in writing, and in formal writings you still want to use this correct form. But now in spoken language, most people just say, who are you going with? Or who are you going to the dance with? They separate the preposition from its object. There's another, non-standard change that is now becoming much, acceptable. If you ask people, do you use whom? They say yes. But if you record them talking and sort of force them into that kind of structure, they rarely use the word whom. Another change that's going on is this increase of the word less with count nouns. Standard English would say there are fewer students now than 5 years ago, so fewer would be the standard form. But more and more people, you'll hear people say there are less students now than 5 years ago, and that to me, see, I put the asterisk and the question mark because it doesn't sound correct. It doesn't sound grammatically correct to me, but you are hearing that more and more. Of course, the acceptance of singular they. I still correct this in students' academic works. So they will write, they will often write each student should bring their book to class. They'll use that plural pronoun with the singular. And I will still correct it to each student should bring his or her book to class. Oftentimes I just tell the writer to change the noun antecedent student to plural, so students should bring their books to class, and that works just fine as well. But you're seeing that that's acceptable to use the plural they with the singular antecedent noun. Another change that is going on in present day English is this use of like. Now this is pretty much, this change is complete, but so you may know it. I don't hear it quite as much as I did in the 90s or the early 2000s, using like as a quotative. So he was like, yeah, I will go. And I was like, sure, come with us. So instead of saying I said or he yelled, using like to do that, signaling that a quote's going to come up or a dialogue is going to come up. But that was definitely a change that occurred, I would say, early 80s, and was complete by the 2000s. Then notice that we can use like as a subordinator. So we've studied how to do subordinate clauses. We saw that, or because, or while, lots of things can be subordinators. But notice that like has also become a subordinator. It seems like we could lose our jobs. So notice that like is doing the same work that I could replace it. I could do paradigmatic replacement with that. It seems that we could lose our jobs. And it's now filling that same function where many years ago that would not be the case. Then notice this. If I gave you this sentence, now this is a standard English sentence. It's been accepted for a long time, but the oak tree is like my best friend. Now, you will recognize that, those of you who studied literature, as being a simile, using like or as to connect to nouns in a metaphorical or a symbolic relationship. The oak tree, like my best friend, taking an inanimate object and comparing it to an animate object. Um, but in this structure, if I were to ask you grammatically what is going on, what would you say? What would that like my best friend be? How would you label that? Uh, in, in grammatical terms, like is followed by a noun phrase. It needs that noun phrase. I can't say the oak tree is like and then end my sentence there. I can't separate that noun phrase from like. My best friend, the oak tree is like. That sounds too Yoda like. So, in these structures, like is functioning as a preposition. So, what you have is a preposition, a determiner, adjective, and a noun. So like has been functioning as a preposition for a long time, as well as a verb. You know, I like ice cream. It can be a verb, but it also can now be a preposition. It could be a subordinator, and it can be a quotative. So it's falling into the same sort of pattern as that, where that can be a pronoun, that can be a subordinator, it can be a determiner. You know, it's doing multiple functions depending on the sentence. This one probably doesn't register at all with you. It's been occurring for so long that no one sees a problem with this, but hopefully we, well, that sentence is kind of messed up. Hopefully the budget will get fixed so we won't lose our jobs. I don't know where that extra we came in. But this probably looks like a sentence adverb. It has the ly. It's not a problem. But it wasn't too long ago that this would have been considered non-standard, and we would have had to say, with all hope, we could have only used hope as a noun. And so now it's been converted into an adverb. We also have this conflation of adverbs and adjective forms. So the pain is real. Here we have the adjective real functioning as a subject complement. The test is real. Again, not a problem. Fits our copula structure. We have the noun, the subject pain or the subject test, followed by a copula verb, a be verb that is the only verb in the verb phrase, and then an adjective, so subject complement. We have the adverb form, the degree adverb of the pain is really severe, the test is really hard, so we have the ly form. It's before an adjective. Severe is an adjective, hard is an adjective, so it's doing that degree work. We could replace it with very. The pain is very severe, pretty severe, fairly severe. It's doing degree adverb work, not a problem. Someday it will be. Someday it will definitely be acceptable and be part of the standard English. We talked a little bit about, when we were talking about modals, that there is a rise of the semimodals. So you have things like wanna, have to, gonna. Because of the way that those structures are both pronounced and used, they are changing their function. So I want to go to the movies. I have to walk the dog. I am gonna buy a new car. So notice that after the wanna, have to, gonna, it's in first place. It's followed by a verb in bare infinitive form. So it's doing sort of modal or semi-modal work. We know modals as those 9: may, might, could, should, but these are moving towards that usage. And so instead of being want to, have to, going to, they're not pronounced that way. You may see that the lexical form changes spelling. We've seen this before in English. Words like a while, that we now write as AWHILE, used to be two words as a while, just like a lot or a cat. Now we have a while as the adverb form. You may see have to, wanna, have to, gonna, also moving that direction. We have this avertive like to. Again, we're back to that word like. And for whatever reason, it's very syntactically flexible. And so in conversation, we have this form like to. I like the got hit by a car. We like the froze to death. And this construction, which is like to, again, is changing in pronunciation and it's changing in its function. And so it is kind of functioning as a semi-modal as well, like the froze, like the got. And it is always linked with negative events. No one liked the got um, a raise. It's never marked, never connected with happy, positive events. It's always linked with negative events, but it is very standard in conversation now. Not standard in formal writing, but definitely standard in conversation. Um, for others, you can see the Yale Grammatical Diversity Project. You'll be able to do that on the regular PowerPoint without the narration, and you can look at all the different changes going on. I put this chart in here just for a minute, just so you can see how people do some syntactic analysis. Notice they're trying, Mai and Leach were trying to figure out what were these words really being used as semi-modals, and not only were they being used similarly in British English and American English. So the the um, the the labels up here are for databases of spoken or written language, and they're just collecting all the examples that they can find of words like going to, um, got to, have to, need to, want to, those kind of things, and then analyzing them to see in the corpus of corpus being linked to body, the body of their data, of these databases. Are they seeing a systematic change both in British English and American English of these being used as in modal-like forms? So this is just an example of that kind of research. Possible paper topics is using one of those examples that you see on the PowerPoints or through the Yale Diversity Project, and kind of just doing the research, a straight research paper on what we know so far about these changes. Structure of your paper would have an intro and a thesis. You would have a background section that would introduce the phenomenon, and also give kind of a lit review of what we know about this structure. Something like the history of likta or wanna, or modals in general. And then you might take this research paper and turn it into an actual research project where you could create a survey. Maybe it's a survey of your peers that you do online. It could be interviews. Interviews can be done online or face to face. And you would describe, you would set up this sort of experiment or survey and see how people, do they accept this form? Do they use this form? Does it still seem like it's non-standard? Would they use it in spoken language? Would they use it in written language? And so you would kind of do a survey to get some results and see what's the status of that. You might do it through like a medium of, say, Facebook or Instagram, and then get the demographics of your population to see, is there a difference between how people of your own age accept that form versus how people who are older do or don't accept that. There might be an issue of education level, so you might collect some demographics, age, sex, education level, region of the country that they live in, region where they were born. Get some demographics on your survey population, and then report back and tell us who accepts this, who doesn't accept this. when you report on that, that section is just straight stats about what you find. So very much descriptive stats. How many people did you survey? Uh, what was the distribution of age groups? What was the distribution of um, like sex or education level? And then what did they report? What patterns did you see in their responses? And then analyze that. What does that tell us? Does that tell us that the language phenomenon is moving to acceptance with the young people, that the young people aren't yet aware of this change in this region? What does it tell us? And then a discussion builds on that. This reference page likely to be APA because this is straight linguistic work, so you would choose an APA format. Another possible paper is to just do a straight research paper on a phenomenon, no data collected, just sort of the history of modals and then maybe the rise of the semi-modal. What have other researchers found? Where have they found this data? What do they project? So this could be just a straight research paper and then with APA references. Okay, so for Thursday, we're going to talk about dialects versus accent and what we as linguists, how we determine those differences. What's the criteria? We'll look at the history of U.S. dialects, tracing the early settlements um, of the U.S. And how that changed our language use and why it is that people in the Northeast have certain kinds of dialects, people in the South have others. Um, and so we'll be looking at those more carefully. For Thursday, if you could, or whenever you watch Thursday's PowerPoint, if you could do the readings, there's 3 short readings, Wolfram and Schilling, um, Romkin and Rodman, that's just a handout, and then Scharinger et al. Um, Read those, and then that will prepare you better for the wiki contribution that you'll do. We'll talk more about this on the Thursday PowerPoints, but you will choose a U.S. dialect. I give you some resources to research that, and then you kind of give us a synopsis of that. What does it mean to speak Brooklynese or Pittsburghese or West Texan? What's the syntactic differences from standard? What's maybe some reasons why that dialect developed. So that will be your assignment. That will be due a week from um, today, if you're watching this on Tuesday. Um, but it's a very fun kind of thing. Your knowledge that you post on there will be part of the collective knowledge that we will be, that will contribute to the test, and then other students can look on there and see what you reported on different dialects. So because of the change in mode, I did this assignment with my other 204, so it's something that I've done before. I just made it a little shorter, easier to accomplish since you'll be online and we're not face to face. So, but we'll talk a little bit more about that on with the next PowerPoints.